Colombia grows world-class coffee, enjoys a vibrant food scene and music culture, and is famous for its rainforests, mountains, and beaches. It is still infamous as a leading producer of cocaine. But a whole different crime is drawing law enforcement attention lately, one with the potential, among other things, to destabilize the economies of Ecuador, El Salvador, and Panama. Colombia is breaking out as a top producer of really convincing fake money, specifically U.S. dollars. From KERA in Dallas, this is Think. I'm Chris Boyd. The dollar is the official currency in those Latin American countries I just mentioned. And even if none of the counterfeit bills ever change hands in the United States, the flood of fakes entering circulation can harm global trust in the dollar as the world's preferred reserve currency. My guest traveled to Colombia to meet with the teams trying to find these fakers and to understand how they have gotten so good at fooling even experts. Udijit Bhattacharjee reports on transnational crime, national security, and science as a contributing writer at the New York Times Magazine, where you can read his article, The Hunt for the Counterfeiter Trying to Make the Perfect Bill. Udijit, welcome back to Think.
Thank you so much, Chris. Always glad to be with you.
I think maybe not everybody is even aware that there are countries outside the United States and its territories that use the dollar as official currency. This has been true in Panama since the time the canal was being built. But Ecuador and El Salvador just adopted the dollar in 2000 and 2001. Just generally, what do these countries see as the benefits of running their economies on dollars?
Well, the dollar is an incredibly stable currency, and that's what gives it so much power around the world. And these countries, I assume, have realized that it's better to peg their economy to the dollar because their own currency or whatever currency they had before wasn't that stable. And the reason that the dollar is so stable is that the dollar is backed by the powerful United States government.
But Colombia is not one of those countries that officially uses dollars. They have a Colombian peso. So why has Colombia become this hotbed of counterfeiting dollars?
Well, so this story began probably about 30 or 35 years ago. And perhaps by a strange quirk of circumstance, the early counterfeiters in Colombia happened to be very good. And so presumably they had a lot of success. And it's funny how industries can mushroom around an early success. So if you have, a town that produces shoes and the shoes succeed well, that town then becomes the center of, of shoes as an industry. In the same way, Colombia ended up becoming a counterfeiter's paradise. And I can explain, why that sustained for so long and why that's the problem has gotten, worse, I guess, over the decades.
We'll get there, but I want to say you opened the piece by dropping us right into this pre-dawn raid where Colombian law enforcement was looking to disrupt a counterfeit operation in 2023. Law enforcement requested 4 military platoons to back them up. Why was that necessary?
Well, several parts of Colombia are really not fully under the Colombian government's control. There are all these rebel groups that control certain parts of Colombia. And the place where this story starts, Caldono, is notorious for being one of those rebel strongholds. So when Colombian law enforcement has to go into one of these areas to disrupt the kind of activity that produces counterfeit dollars, they need a lot of support. They need military support because law enforcement by itself, just policemen with their guns, would perhaps get overwhelmed by force.
Government control or lack thereof is really interesting in this story because the other part of the world that is really known infamously for producing good fake dollars is North Korea. As far as U.S. authorities can tell, this is done with the support or at the command of the North Korean regime. That doesn't seem to be the case with the Colombian government, right? They are trying to
No,
stop
that's
this.
not the case. Yes, the Colombian government itself has been trying for years to curb this activity. Because bear in mind that these Colombian counterfeiters are not just making fake US dollars, they're also making fake euros and they're making fake pesos. There's a lot of incentive that the Colombian government has to try and stop this activity. But yes, you're right that producing counterfeit money has often been seen as a geopolitical sort of a form of geopolitical warfare, and that's what North Korea has been accused of doing by forging American dollars and trying to push that out into the global economy.
It's easy to forget that before the Secret Service got its second job of protecting the president and other important government officials, its primary duty was, stamping out counterfeit operations within the United States. How much help does the Colombian government get from the Secret Service?
The Colombian government has gotten a lot of money from America just for law enforcement in general. And this dates back to the 1990s when something called Plan Colombia was started by the American government. The main motivation at the time was to try and stop the production and exportation of cocaine. So that's really the crime that drew America's attention, years ago. But some of those funds have also gone toward controlling counterfeit currency. There's a reason that that the American authorities have always been so concerned about counterfeit dollar production in Colombia because the crimes of drug trafficking, the crime of terrorism, and the crime of producing counterfeit money are all interlinked. The same groups that hold sway over some of these areas that are not in the control of the government. Those groups produce cocaine and they sell the cocaine to fund the purchase of weapons that they then use to fight the Colombian government. And sometimes they're doing those activities either using counterfeit money or they're actually producing counterfeit money and then using the proceeds from it to fund their terrorist activity.
So the denominations being faked are mostly 50 and $100 bills. Is that accurate?
50 and $100 bills and also the $20 bill. But yes, you're right. The $100 and $50 are the most lucrative.
What did you learn about how that currency is smuggled out of Colombia when that happens successfully?
Well, the same routes that Colombian gangs use to transport cocaine out of the country are used for the dissemination or the transportation of these forged dollars. So it's often the same mules, the same trucks, the same land vehicles, the same boats, the drug flights, that carry cocaine. It's often those same modes that are being used to ship counterfeit money into the United States. But I have to say that this was a big problem in the 90s, up until the 90s, and then starting in the early 2000s, um, the Secret Service and American law enforcement did a much better job of stopping the inflow of Colombia produced counterfeit dollars into America. And so, what the Colombians now do, the counterfeit makers in Colombia now do, is they take this counterfeit money and you know, they supply it to Ecuador, they supply it to El Salvador, and they supply it to other parts of the world in order to turn a profit.
What happens to economies where this cash comes in that is not represented by actual money anywhere in the treasury?
Well, so it's funny you ask because, when I started working on the story, I just kept thinking, what is really the difference between a fake $100 bill and a real $100 bill? Well, the difference is, to be precise, $100. Because a fake $100 bill, once it gets detected, whatever point in the chain, whether it's at the bank where it's being deposited, or whether it's at a grocery store where the clerk at the counter says, "Hey, this is fake," um, the money stops right there. The buck literally stops right there. Um, that piece of paper loses all of its value instantly. So what happens in economies that depend on the dollar, economies outside the United States, uh, is that, let's say there's a grocery store that receives, a forged $50 bill but doesn't detect it at the time, and then they collect all these $50 bills at the end of the day, and they go to their bank, and at their bank, the cashier detects it. Well, now this grocery store owner is out of luck, because their $50 has just been declined. It's like a bad check. Um, but beyond that, there's some other problems. There's some sort of bigger scale problems that are caused by the circulation of fake money, and I can tell you more about that.
Please.
Yeah. Well, so the American dollar is of course an incredibly powerful and stable currency around the world, and the reason it's stable is that it's backed by the U.S. government, but also people trust it. I mean, it's funny. It's kind of a chicken and egg thing, but the more that a currency is trusted, the more valuable it becomes because everyone honors this currency. You go to an antique store in Belgium, you can use your $100 bill. You go to a roadside stall in Nigeria, and they might also be able to use or honor your $100 bill. But if you have enough fakes entering circulation, then you end up losing trust. People start to wonder when they receive a $100 bill or a $50 bill, they might start to wonder if it's real. And as that trust declines, the demand for the US dollar overseas goes down. And that has knock on effects on America's ability to make money from printing money, which is a whole thing that I learned when I was working on this piece. It's funny, but the government actually makes money by printing money and issuing currency.
You and I need to get into that business, I think.
Yes.
If you'll excuse the expression, can we assume that the buck stops anytime one of these fake bills is deposited or brought for deposit to a legitimate financial institution? Are they pretty much always caught there?
Well, there's sometimes caught, your local Home Depot might catch a forged bill. Similarly, a grocery store in Colombia might catch a forged bill. But yes, usually most people are caught unawares, and the buck stops at the cashier's counter at the bank.
You did it. It seems strange to say this, but you demonstrate that many of the counterfeit bills being produced in Colombia are really just excellent quality. So I want to talk first about the fakes that aren't so good. Amateurs these days might buy a really good scanner and a really good color printer to try and produce counterfeit bills. Why are those usually pretty quickly detected after they reach circulation?
Well, the main reason is that they lack the texture that the real dollar bill has. If you I'm sure you've felt, your share of greenbacks, over the years. And so if you feel, you'll feel a bumpiness, like a sandpaper like quality to the dollar bill. And that's because of the raised print, sort of the embossed nature of the material that is printed on a dollar bill. And when counterfeiters use photocopiers to print dollars, fake dollars, um, they just can't achieve that feel. So that's usually that's the reason. I mean, it's not that they don't have some success. People are so accepting of the dollar that most people don't think twice before accepting a dollar bill, in change, for instance. But yes, if you just feel it closely, not even closely, you can just tell that it's just a piece of paper and it's not real money.
The U.S. Bureau of Printing and Engraving has added over time a number of security features trying to keep people from producing this thing that only it is legally permitted to produce. Tell us about some of those design changes.
Yeah, so the Bureau of Engraving actually has a very, very sophisticated process for making money, for printing money, and making sure that that those dollar bills can't be easily forged. So, for instance, the paper itself that dollars are printed on, they are sort of a special kind of paper, of a certain thickness and feel, and they're made with a combination of linen and cotton. Um, and there's a certain percentage. I think the article I mentioned the percentage. It's escaping me right now. Maybe it's 75% linen and 25% cotton, or the other way around. Um, and then, if you look closely, if you hold up a dollar bill against the light, you'll see these little threads. These tiny micro threads that are. It's almost like the dollar bill is flecked with these little threads, and that's a security feature. Um, then, if you look at, there's a security thread, which is kind of a shiny little band, uh, kind of wrapped around, the dollar bill. So if you hold it like horizontally, you'll see it sort of running across, through the middle, not quite the middle, but off to one side. Um, and then, if you examine that band closely, you'll see that it has certain markings. So there's a lot of detailing in a dollar bill. I mean, it's actually too numerous to list in a single monologue. Almost, you'll have to read the story. But yeah, there's a bunch of details, and then there's the raised print sort of character, which is another security feature, and that is produced through what's known as intaglio printing. And intaglio printing involves sort of the exertion of almost of like 20 tons of pressure on this paper, so that these grooves are made on the paper, and the ink, fills up those grooves, and that's how the printing is done. And that's why what you get in the end is a very distinctive feel and look that can't be replicated easily.
This is so interesting. Some fakes are so good that they're almost too perfect. And that's how experts are able to tell they're not real, right? They take out a jeweler's loop and they look for something called feathering.
Yeah, correct. I was surprised when I learned this, but I was in Colombia, and the Secret Service agent, who I interviewed extensively for this piece, he asked me to look at I guess it was a $50 bill, and I saw that, everything in it was perfect. Um, and I thought, wow, this must be a very sophisticated, forgery. But it turns out that that itself is a giveaway because remember, I told you about the intaglio printing process. Uh, and the intaglio printing process works in a way that leads to some ink sort of spilling out from these tiny grooves to create like edges around the matter that's being printed, so that you get these tiny hair like like fuzziness around the printed material. And what's unique to every dollar bill is that the feathering is a little bit different. Because this is a mechanical process. Uh, every time this intaglio press weighs down or presses down on the paper, the results are not identical. And so it's almost like snowflakes. You get this tremendous diversity, and so it's impossible to make feathering that is alike between two notes. And so when Secret Service agents or other law enforcement are looking at dollar bills and they're examining them, and they see that the feathering patterns are similar across different banknotes, they can tell that that's a sign that it's been forged.
All right, let's talk about the really skilled printers who get into this criminal trade. How does it happen that somebody who has or works for a business that cranks out, mailers and flyers and business cards, ends up trying their hand at making fake U.S. currency?
I've thought the same thing, and it turns out that there's a vigorous printing industry in Colombia, just like in most countries of the world. But printers and people that work at print shops don't make that much money. And so sometimes when they get an offer from a counterfeiter who comes in and says, "Listen, I want to use your press to produce some forged money," it's almost it's too attractive to resist, and so that's how several print shops end up getting co-opted by counterfeiters in Colombia. um, and of course, Colombian law enforcement is working very hard all the time to try and identify the print shops that have gone rogue, that have gone bad in this way. Uh, but yeah, it's not so difficult to lure the owner of a print shop and say, "Look, during the daytime you print your flyers and leaflets and posters and what have you, but we would like the evening shift, please."
How did you track down the once and future counterfeiter that you call Julio in the article?
Well, I wish I could tell you some grand story about about wandering through the jungle and finding him. But the fact is that he's now an informant who works for Colombian law enforcement, and so they were happy to introduce me to him, and that's how I ended up talking to him.
But this was a guy who, so he had worked in a print shop. He started doing counterfeiting. He got caught, spent 6 years in prison, gets out of prison, wants to make a clean start. And understandably, no legitimate printing company would hire him.
Yes, he said he really tried hard, that he spent over a year looking for work at a print shop, and he was very skilled, but no dice, and that kind of compelled him to go back into the counterfeit business.
How much does it cost, roughly speaking, to produce a high quality fake $100 bill?
So the numbers I got kind of vary from maybe $3 to $4, kind of in that range. So that's a pretty hefty margin of profit. And I guess if you scale up the operation, the costs can go down even further. Uh, the $3 or $4 it's costing sort of includes all the materials required to manufacture the counterfeit money, and it also includes, the costs of transportation, this, and also presumably, I don't know this for sure, but the costs of sort of paying protection money to the rebel groups that often provide, the locations where the counterfeit money is being produced.
And the equipment they need, is it stuff that you can source from just regular companies providing materials to printers in legitimate trade?
Most of it, yes. Many of these lithographic presses, you can purchase them. You could probably go on Amazon and buy these presses.
So, at the heart of this story, I mean, there is that counterfeiter, and we'll get to him, but there is a Colombian law enforcement official named Leonardo Prieto. Tell us about him and how he steered this operation in pursuit of a counterfeiter that for a while was known only as Israeli.
Yeah. Leonardo, he's a really, he's such a gentle and sweet guy that it's hard to imagine him interrogating suspects and such. But he's been very successful in this line of investigation. He's been investigating counterfeit for, I guess, a couple of decades now. But you know, the Colombian law enforcement people, they have a really good network of informants. Um, you know, I guess I've introduced Julio to you. He was he's just one of many informants that the Colombians work with, and I guess sometime in 2023, the Prito and his colleagues, they got a tip about this counterfeit factory in Caldono in southwest Colombia. Uh, and once they got this information, they started developing it. Um, they were finally able to, after months of surveillance, which Leonardo told me was actually quite difficult because Caldono is in one of those parts of the country that are controlled by rebel forces, and so they had to make many recon missions out to sort of the general area where this factory they'd heard about was located, and they finally identified this marijuana plantation, this marijuana farm that had a building in it where the counterfeit factory was located. And so that's when in October of 2023, they decided to conduct a raid, and that wasn't a simple affair. They needed the military, they needed air support to go in and very quickly kind of confiscate the materials that the counterfeiters were using for making these dollars, and that's where they got these, these highly sophisticated $50 bill forgeries. And once they started looking at the quality of those forgeries, they knew that there was probably a very good master artist slash designer who was behind the creation of that $50 bill.
When he was caught, he gave up without a fight ultimately. And in the place that he had been working, they found close to $1 million in fake currency.
Correct. It's funny. It's just there's these counterfeit investigators see so much money in their lifetime. It's mind boggling how much money they see. But of course, it's not worth the paper it's printed on because all of it is fake. But yeah, he had like a big stack of these $50 and $100 bills, at his house, um, and he had all the equipment that he needed to produce these notes.
It's just so interesting to think about sticking with this. If you had $900,000 in fake American banknotes, it would seem like you just cut them up and, take off for somewhere that they accept dollars and stop working for life.
Yeah, I guess maybe that's what he should have done because he's ended up in not such a good place, having been caught. But I guess when you start producing money at that scale, $1 million is nothing. You're always thinking, well, I could actually make, you know, real money from this. This money might get caught somewhere as forgery, but I could just keep going. So, it's yeah, it's just the greed that keeps people going and making more money that's fake.
I have to ask you, and I don't know whether you were close by soon after any of these seizures and in a position to look at a stack of something like $900,000 worth of fake US bills. I mean, anyone who, deals with currency, our brains get, we can spot a dollar bill that somebody dropped across the street because somehow we're primed for this. I mean, did you have like a visceral or emotional reaction to seeing large amounts of cash if you did during your reporting process?
I did see large amounts of cash, actually. I was in Leonardo's office, and they showed me these gigantic stacks of fake dollars that they had seized. And of course, unless you look at it very closely, and that too with the eye of a Secret Service agent or a Colombian investigator, you wouldn't really know that these are fake. They seem real. Um, it made me laugh. I did have a reaction, but it made me laugh because I knew that as a journalist I would never in my life make that kind of money. Um, but here I was, and then we took some pictures. They wanted to take some pictures because that a journalist was there, so they wanted to show off. Um, but yeah, it's funny that the power of these fake dollars. I mean, another thing that made me laugh as I was reporting this piece was finding out that drug dealers often will use counterfeit money to hoodwink each other,
Ah,
down the chain. Like they'll mix in, you said $1 million, they'll mix in, 500,000, half a million, a million fake currency notes, in with real, real dollars, in order to do a transaction. And what really, made my jaw drop was learning that in several kidnapping cases, um, law enforcement had worked with the victim's family to use counterfeit money as the ransom amount. So that's how much counterfeit money there is in Colombia, and that's how it sometimes ends up being used.
there's a real poetic justice to that, isn't there?
There is. I bet, I'm sure there are movies where that has happened. Where I mean, I've seen movies where the money's being handed over to the criminals, and they open the briefcase or the suitcase, and they see a neat stack of money on top, but then later on they discover that there's just rocks or wooden blocks or some other garbage underneath that first layer. So it's a little bit like that.
Well, you share in the piece that when Israeli was caught, he said he was just producing these really high quality fakes so that he could sell them to Hollywood and they could be used in movies. Is that like the counterfeiter's equivalent of telling your parents that you're holding cigarettes for a friend when they find a pack in your bag?
That's quite right, Chris. It turns out that this movie money excuse has been used by counterfeiters a lot because, in fact, in Colombia, you know, the transportation of counterfeit money is kind of its own little niche industry. And so the people who are involved in transporting money will often uh, they'll ask for money to be made that says in fine print that this is made for movies.
Hmm.
You can go on Amazon and buy fake dollars that actually have like a disclaimer somewhere on the banknote that says, this is fake money, this is for Hollywood, or this is movie money. Um, and so they'll transport these stacks of fake dollars uh, with that disclaimer on it, so that if they get caught somewhere along the way, they can use that as their uh, get out of jail free card. But once they get to wherever the destination is, you know, once they've, once the dollars have reached their destination, then they use a chemical process to kind of wash off that little bit of writing on the banknote, um, so that it can now be sold as real forgeries versus, forgeries that are just like a ha, it was a prank. But so yes, absolutely, this was the defense that this guy Israeli, whose real name last name is Rodriguez, um, that he used in court, but it didn't work.
You do describe Israeli Rodriguez in the piece as an artist. And often we say that word as a compliment. In this case, it's just frankly true, right? Like he cares deeply, for good reasons or bad, he cares deeply about the quality and the precision and the perfection of these counterfeit bills he was making.
Absolutely. I mean, some of these master artists, like this guy, they really they've earned the admiration of law enforcement because of the care that they take, and because of the precision and the artistry, because uh, trying to get to that stage of perfection in creating a forgery is no mean feat. These guys have been working day and night. They spend years gaining experience at print shops, and then they decide that they're going to use those skills to go into the counterfeit business. And then there's a few of them who are so good at it that the templates that they make, or the designs that they make, are the ones that they're like the master bill producers. Those plates are then sold to others, almost like a franchise. As you can see, this criminal activity has like many different aspects to it and many layers to it. And because it's a full fledged industry operating in the shadows, um, there's different functionalities within that industry that are performed by different types of people. But the artist kind of occupies, the most exalted, place in that ecosystem.
You mentioned earlier that years ago, decades ago, the Secret Service really cracked down on the presence and circulation of counterfeit bills within the United States. I'm really curious, though, despite that crackdown, about the presence of master artists within U.S. borders who wouldn't have to transport this cash anywhere to start putting it into circulation. I mean, why is there not a commensurate counterfeiting operation in the United States to produce fake dollars?
Well, I think there's one reason is that most grocery stores and most big retailers like Home Depot, um, the clerks are sort of trained in spotting fake bills. I think that's one reason. The other reason is that it's just I guess the crime is easier to detect here in this country. Given the efficiency of the law enforcement apparatus here. So I think the risks are way too high in this country. It's not that people don't try it, but but I think the risks are much lower in a country like Colombia or a country like Peru, which is another country that produces a lot of counterfeit dollars.
I'm curious about the move that a lot of sort of underworld syndicates have made to transactions using things like Bitcoin. Is that digging into this business of counterfeit cash at all?
I've wondered that, believe it or not, after COVID, uh, demand for cash actually went up. And so you would think that cash doesn't have much relevance in today's economy, but it turns out that cash is still king in many parts of the world, and that's why cash continues. But yes, as we uh, march into the future, where there's more and more use of digital money and uh, criminal groups use Bitcoin to make transactions. I guess counterfeit money will probably come down, um, and there will be new types of there will be like counterfeit Bitcoin, or
Mm.
there will be digital wallets that are forged and things like that, and probably some of that has already started happening, but that's not what I was focused on when I was working on this piece.
I mean, as a guy who covers all kinds of crime happening in all parts of the world, do you think there's something in human nature? Is it about our drive for a shortcut that, some percentage of us will try to skirt the rules to our advantage? Like, why do crimes like this happen that can't possibly be crimes of passion, that are just crimes of greed committed by people who could make decent money doing something else?
Right. Well, I just think it's greed. It's quite simple. When people see the risk to reward ratio, when they see how much more they could be making. Yes, you could be working at a print shop printing flyers and making a decent living in Colombia, but given the alternative, suddenly you see that you could get away with counterfeiting money and end up making uh, you know, like 10 times more every week, every month, whatever. Um, I think the temptation is great to do that. And it doesn't matter what country you're talking about, whether it's Colombia or the United States or Canada or Europe. Um, these crimes arise because they offer so much more reward in the moment than any legitimate activity might. So, on the whole, I think there's a pretty simple explanation for why there is so much crime. And the thing is, as soon as someone succeeds at it, then there's copycat criminals who are immediately drawn to that activity. If you've got one counterfeiter, and I'm sure that's how it started in Colombia back in the early '90s or even before that, where you had a few counterfeiters. Um, and in fact, back then, those businesses were kind of tightly controlled by families. You had like one artist, the same family was making everything and transporting everything. And then other families saw how easy it was to do this, and they tried to replicate it. And that's why law enforcement is always busy. If it's not this, it's something else.
Has this reporting project changed how you look at the cash that you receive in change or from your bank when you need a few dollars or from the ATM?
It has actually. I mean, I won't say that I'm now a master at detecting forgeries, but certainly, when I touch dollars now, I'm like, wait a second, uh, you know, is this okay? It's just I've never come across, I've never been handed a bad note yet. So, but boy, the day I am, I think I'll be ready.
Udijit Bhattacharjee reports on transnational crime, national security, and science as a contributing writer at the New York Times Magazine. His recent article is called The Hunt for the Counterfeiter Trying to Make the Perfect Bill. Udijit, it is always nice to talk with you. Thanks for making time.
Thank you so much, Chris. I appreciate it.
Think is distributed by PRX, the Public Radio Exchange. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, anywhere you get your podcasts, or at think.kera.org. Again, I'm Chris Boyd. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.